Here we are, back for Chapter 9, in the second portion of the class, 9 to 14, which will talk about creativity and also media. So here we go. As we always start out each chapter, the framework for it. Right now we're going to be talking about the creative process and managing creativity, which seems a little bit like an oxymoron, because how can you manage creativity, something that is so sort of ephemeral and hard to pinpoint, but we're going to talk about it. There are some ways you can do it. Okay, so here, just another example that hopefully you can see that well. These are the another example of integrated brand promotion in action, hotels.com, the ads I'm sure you're familiar with. They have a spokesperson, a fictitious spokesperson who roams around the world at different sites. And it's something that you remember. It's a clever idea. He's got his own social media account, and it's someone that you identify with the brand. So creativity in advertising is really very important. It helps to break through the clutter. Clutter is a really significant issue in advertising, that there is so much clutter, psychological noise, and the advertisers, and we're so bombarded with so many things every day, and advertisers work hard to break through that and get people to remember their ad, remember what they're talking about. So the idea of creativity is it helps ads to break through clutter and get remembered. Helps hopefully to help the ads make sense, looking at things in just a little different way to consumers, and so to help better understand and explain it. It sets an agenda in that it tells what the plan is, how you're going to look at the product, and how you're going to communicate that. It adds meaning to the brand for sure, and also helps to develop levels of emotional connection, because emotional connection is so important. So here we're going to look at a couple other samples of creativity in advertising. Hopefully you can see that not very clearly, but you can see it with the on your slides. It's an ad for Absolute Vodka. Coming up next is Taco Bell. You can see a little bit of the Chihuahua they use. Again, these are just by repeating things over and over again. Certainly with the Chihuahua from Taco Bell and the creative use of the Absolute bottle and the Absolute ads, people tend to remember it. And that can also become more timely. Also, there's an ad for Google. Again, I wish you could see it. But as I said, it's on the slides. A very bright and colorful look at Google using Sesame Street ads. So you might want to ask yourself, what do you think of as creativity? And you can define it in a lot of different ways. You're making the usual unusual, making connections that people might not normally think of, clever play on words, that kind of thing. So it's this idea of bringing in inconsistent elements to make a new connection. And oftentimes creativity is going to display maybe what we learned in our childhood, what our social circumstances are like, our cognitive styles, meaning how we think. Cognitive meaning how we think. So creative minds, and everybody has a creative mind. It's just a matter of whether our ability to sort of unleash that creativity. And there are a lot of different characteristics you could claim for a creative mind. Some positives, maybe some not as positive, but generally speaking, people who are creative are very self-confident. They tend to be alert and to realize what's going on around them. They think about things in an unconventional manner. Creative people are generally speaking very hardworking and very dedicated to their work. They need to be self-promoters to be successful, and have a childlike quality, and would say in a critical way, meaning in a positive. This childlike quality, looking at the world without any kind of preconceptions, is a critical factor, a very important factor. And people who are creative want to be, when we say marginality, that they want to be different from everybody else. No emotional stability, I added that because it's in the book, but I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that, but you can decide yourself. I don't know that creativity equals lack of emotional stability, but it's you could say that people are more open to experiencing, creative people are more open to experiencing their emotions. So generally speaking, people who are in advertising really are praised for their creativity and creative genius. And it's reflected in the success of a product or a brand. And some people, as I said, are more creative than others, but truly we all have this creative ability inside of us. It's just an opportunity that we have to express it or unleash it. And certainly there's a high degree, high correlation between high intelligence and creativity. So this whole idea about advertising agencies, we talked about advertising agencies that are the people who facilitate all advertising activities for a corporation or any kind of organization. And they are not necessarily always, some consider them in very high esteem. Some people might consider the creative teams to be a little bit, they're not as nose to the grindstone. They're not as traditional. What we think of them as traditional hard work. Because it's creative work is hard work. There's also a lot of play involved in it as well, and they're not necessarily looking at things. They don't come to things from much of a business viewpoint as other departments might. So if a customer is unhappy, the account executive who is in charge will be in charge of. That's the person who works at the agency who will be in charge of different accounts, of different companies. The account executive is the one who works as liaison or the go-between between the agency and the client. So, ABC Advertising Company and ABC Advertising Agency and XYZ Company would have an account executive that would communicate between the two. And it's very important to keep the customer happy, and but at the same time manage the creativity and make sure that for the creative. Most creative minds to excel, they really need to challenge people's preconceptions about ideas and think about things in a different way. And it's not, as I said, it's a different part of the business. It's not as business focused. It's not as numbers focused. And so sometimes there can be a little bit of a tension between those two types of minds. So if you want to make sure that you're not going to be creative, or you're not going to promote creativity, you have to think about things. The target audience is just a statistic. You can't think about them. You think about them purely as numbers. You don't think about them in terms of people or psychographics. Making the strategy an assortment in that having too much variety so the customer is confused. No long-term philosophy or theory that you're going to stick by. You don't want to look at things, analyzing creative like a research report. You don't want things to be, as I said, too tight or too straight-laced or too conventional, so to speak. The creative process, you can't necessarily, and when we say professional, it's you have to let people express themselves in perhaps ways that other people might consider to be unbusinesslike. Not rude, but not, coat and tie, button down. And then the other thing too, and this is just true in general, that you want to make sure that you practice what you preach. If you're going to say one thing and do something else, then that's not going to foster creativity. Okay, so some more ideas. Just showing out half thought out ideas to your client. You really need to think things through. You may have to make sure that you can't mix and match the campaigns. You have to make sure that everything flows consistently. Once you start production, you can't start to change them. And and assessing blame, well, that was a bad idea. It was poor creativity. Imitating, not a good idea because you want to be the original one, and particularly you want to be the one out there first with the idea. And you can't always necessarily believe what testing, if just because you get a good score doesn't mean that the general population is going to respond as well. They probably will, but you have to be sure that you're looking at things critically. Okay, so how can you coordinating collaboration and creativity? So you have to make sure that it's timing, sort of the timing is everything, and everything is brought together at a very important moment. You need to coordinate and collaborate in order to execute any kind of project, and that doesn't change with advertising. And the other thing too is using teams. Talk a lot about the importance of cross-functional teams and teams that have different backgrounds and bring different perspectives and ideas, because if you have everyone thinking in the same direction and everybody thinking the same thing, then they're not really thinking about the world objectively. They're just thinking about a small area, and it's important to have multiple viewpoints. So teamwork is really super important, and then everybody gets along and everybody is open to sharing ideas and accepting ideas. So when we talk about teams, you want to make sure that people are dedicated to performing, and that people hold each other accountable, and if someone's slacking off on the team, that the other team members will encourage them to step up more. And having different, we say blending expertise through teams creates synergy. That is this idea of people with different expertise if different areas of expertise can really flourish, allows the team to flourish more. We talk about synergy, is that things that the whole is greater than the parts. And if you have different viewpoints coming in, chances are you're going to come out with a better result. Effective teams find ways to let individuals bring their unique contribution to the forefront. So it's not, we talk about in organizational behavior, we talk about a thing called groupthink. That is everybody just focusing on one idea and not looking at other alternatives to answers. And that learning is really encouraged. It's important to always be learning new things and being open to new things. It's important that management encourages this idea of learning and understanding a new scope. Okay, so more about coordination, collaboration, and creativity. The leader has a responsibility to make sure that the team builds consensus about the goals and the purpose. They also need to make sure that the team is consistent with a strategy. So if the strategy is awareness and the team is going off on sales, then that's not going to work, because everybody needs to be rowing in the same direction. And the other thing is a leader has to be willing to dig in and roll their sleeves up and do the work themselves as well, and really be a part of the process. So this is one way. It's a nice visualization that the account team can be thought of as a bicycle wheel, and the team leader is the hub of the wheel. That without that hub, the rest of the team isn't working. I shouldn't say isn't working, but isn't functioning properly. And also make sure that everybody works together. The leader has to make sure that everybody is focused on the same thing and focused on that same goal. So there is this thing called a creative brief, and the brief essentially is an outline for what they hope to achieve, and is what would be like the roadmap that was what would guide people through. And you also need to make sure that when we talk about liberating decision-making, freeing decision-making, so making sure that the decision-making process is something that's shared across the board, and that all people who are part of the team are part of the decision process. So again, we go back to this whole idea of the importance of igniting creativity, of making sure that there's there's a variety of expertise, but the right expertise, and that people are coming in with different types of thought. And also this idea that people can challenge each other, in a good way challenge each other to bring out the best in each other, and having tension. But when we say tension, it's not a bad tension, but it's not just this like kind of lackadaisical, this is the way we've always done it. Just having enough of an edge on that people stay on their toes. And cognitive style too, this whole idea of cognitive style is important, that we all think different ways, and we have to respect and understand and appreciate how everybody's thought process is different, and understand how we can best take advantage of that. So it's also important that there's a safe environment, that people don't feel that they'll be criticized, and that there's no interpersonal conflicts or interpersonal abrasion. So interpersonal struggles or interpersonal conflict that you don't want people to feel unwilling or uncomfortable sharing ideas. That there can be like the creative abrasion is the positive side of it, is that from differing ideas, new ideas and better ideas form, but interpersonal abrasions, just personality conflicts, that is not going to help the situation at all. And it really is important for the leader to make sure that that does not happen. And that's, talking about that as a whole other subject matter. It's something that we would cover in organizational behavior. But, easier said than done, but it is really, really vitally important. Okay, so brainstorming, I assume at some point you have all participated in brainstorming. It's the idea that any idea is a good idea, and you just toss out ideas. And it's not until there's no one's criticized for an idea, there's no negative reaction to an idea, that it's just a free for all. There's no judgment, and with the idea that someone might come out and say something wacky, but from that someone else might come up with a great idea that should be followed. And that you can think about what were the ideas going in and how many more have we come out with at the end. Okay, so more about coordination, collaboration, and creativity. So you should come up with some level of action afterwards. The brainstorming session should lead to some sort of actions afterwards. It helps to have someone who knows what they're doing and gets as good interpersonal skills and is a facilitator and can really move those discussions along. And creative abrasion, as we talked about a couple slides back, really should be embraced. This idea that people with clashing ideas, because I have this one idea and I think we should go this way, and I think we should go the blue route, and someone else says, well, I think we should go the yellow route, and they say, well, maybe we can do both routes, and that kind of thing. So also trust is in any relationship is so important, and there are certain rules that should be followed, and that people should look into and be respectful, and that kind of thing with brainstorming. Again, that kind of goes back to having a skilled facilitator. Okay, so our last one that we're going to talk about, coordination, collaboration, and creativity. So it's important that the right people are assigned to teams. And you can't just assign people who you think are safe, or you think are going to think the same way you do, or you think are just going to be yes people. It's important that the right people are in the boat, so to speak. And also how you understand how some people think. One person thinks very logically, one person thinks very creatively, thinks about things politically, one person thinks about things in terms of design, one person thinks about things in terms of psychology or sociology, that kind of thing. And it's important too that they understand that the team has a responsibility to the client, and without clients you have no agency, so there needs to be some sort of connection between an understanding about that. So and with any kind of conflict occurs, it's really important that is managed straight away and not left to fester, and which will eventually kill the team and kill the creativity. So the other idea too is that to keep things as fresh as possible, and constantly be changing what the team is looking for can help keep things fresh and on the toes, on the people on their toes. So there are 3 P's. We have our 4 P's in marketing: product, price, place, promotion, and our 3 P's in creativity are people, process, and place. So you need to understand the people you're dealing with. You have to have a process, and you need to know where your destination is. So you need to look at this idea of redefining problems, looking at things in a unique way. You also have to be willing to analyze and critique your own ideas. So think objectively about what you're thinking about, and be prepared for opposition. Be prepared for someone to challenge you. It's good if someone challenges you, not too much, of course, but it's good to have someone challenge you so you maybe think about things in just a little different way. And it's also important to have adequate knowledge about the product that you're promoting or the product that you're trying to be creative about. Because if you don't have enough information, you're just kind of making stuff up. Okay, so this idea of finding a standard safe solution first, that's not necessarily always a good thing, because you do want to, maybe you eventually will end up there, but you want to make sure you explore all other avenues. And it's about risk taking. No risk, no rewards, as they say. So you have to challenge not only your own comfort zone, but the comfort zone of the group, the team. But on the other side, you do have to believe in yourself and believe in what you're doing. Cherishing ambiguity. Ambiguity is something as Americans we're actually pretty good with. Ambiguity being uncertainty, or not exactly sure how things are going to turn out. Basically it's about being willing to take a chance and really appreciating that. And you also have to enjoy the whole creative process. Some people don't feel comfortable in the creative process, and some people don't feel comfortable when there are no rules, and that's good, because we need people who like to keep things going in a systematic fashion. But it's also super important that people enjoy the idea of creativity and are willing to step outside comfort zones and step outside thought processes and traditional thought processes and traditional ideas. So what are some ways that you can become more creative? One is to redefine the problem and see them differently from different people. So think about donuts. Like, we think about donuts as breakfast food, but maybe we should see donuts as dessert food. Maybe we should think about it a different way. We see donuts as something to eat, as is, but maybe we should think about slicing the donuts in half and putting eggs in between. I don't know, something. You to redefine problems, so how it would be normally accepted. It's also important that, again, we talked about this briefly in the last slides, that it's important to analyze your own ideas and critique your own ideas, and I recognize that you have good ones and you have bad ones, and think about that. Again, this idea of opposition, it's important to be prepared for opposition and be able to defend your idea. And also recognize what is absolutely, recognize it really is impossible to be creative if you don't have enough knowledge. We talked about that before already. And by the same token, having too much information that can also stifle creativity. Perhaps if you know too many negative things or too many positive things, or you're too familiar with it, and you get this idea, you're sinking in and thinking about things in a too much of a traditional manner, or too much of a tried and true manner, or way things have always been done. If you know too much about something, that's also can be bad. So it limits the amount of creativity that you can reach. So once you find the safe idea, you want to decide, okay, we've got this safe idea, but how much further out can we go? How much more can we push it? Can we take this to make a little twist on it? Is that worth is there an opportunity to do that? And you also constantly want to expand your own comfort zone, constantly push yourself, constantly challenge yourself. That's true in life as well. And again, believe in yourself. Be able to defend yourself to any doubters. And again, this idea of cherishing ambiguity, because in things that are kind of vague or not specified, or you're not sure how they're going to work out, because from that, really, you're going to get some really great new ideas. And usually people are most creative when they're doing something that they love. I always encourage when my students are doing group projects and I give them the option to pick a company or a product to work with, that it's an area that they really enjoy. Because if it's not something you enjoy, chances are you're going to get a little bored with it, and you're not going to think about it in a new way. If there are things you think about on a pretty regular basis, if you're really interested in music, then it's something that you've been exposed to enough music that you can think creatively about how to present music, or what types of music, or where music could be shared, or that's just one example. Okay, so that wraps up Chapter 9 on managing creativity, and we'll see you back here when we talk about Chapter 10. Thanks, everyone.